What's up, y'all? This is Carla, aka Seela the Poet, and I'm sharing my DV story, part two, in the hopes that somebody can be inspired or can maybe be helped by me sharing. So, part two. So, I ended up choosing a partner that ended up being abusive, and it could have been because of my immaturity. It could have been because I didn't have the support of someone telling me what a relationship was supposed to be. And I grew up seeing, that type of violent and volatile relationship and kind of normalizing it. So when I got with this partner, um, you know, he represented himself very well. We had a long engagement when we were in college, and his representative treated me well for about maybe 3 or 4 years. And there were some initial red flags that I ignored. He had previously been violent with an ex-girlfriend, but he promised that he would never ever do it to me, you know? And, me being young, naive, and in love, I believed him. And that was a red flag that I ignored for the sake of love. And once I got married, that's when first it was verbal abuse started. I got pregnant real quick. We eloped against church council, by the way, because when you're young and in love, you just have to have that person. You just have to be with them. And you're in the high of the honeymoon phase. But you're not really able to see reality that clearly. And I was young and I was, under the love spell, and we got married, and I got pregnant really quickly, and that's when the trouble started. My first experience with verbal abuse was him telling me that he should have never married me, and that I'm a stupid wife, and that basically once I have the baby, he hopes something happens to it. Kind of like wishing violence and wishing harm on his unborn child. And it was very, very hurtful. There were times when I didn't cry in front of him, but I would cry in private, And I would pray and I would cry and I would accept it because, maybe I did try to pressure him, I mean, in the Christian church, there's this big, big stigma that if you have sex outside of marriage, you're like this horrible person, and this very, very terrible, people look down on you. And who wants to go through that? So, we are encouraged a lot to get married so that we're not fornicating. And I followed that model. I figured, you know what? I had let him know that I didn't want to have sex outside of marriage, but we were both young, hot, and lusty. And, we wanted to do what we wanted to do, and we did. I got pregnant. He lost his job. And, the stressors of life hit us. And all of a sudden now, I become an emotional punching bag for him. I couldn't do anything right. Every other month, he was threatening to divorce me. He would threaten me. Yeah, these were the type of things I experienced. And, with abuse, it goes in cycles and levels. And eventually, the verbal abuse became emotional and then physical. Okay. My first experience with abuse with him, where it became physical. Our son was sick. Our newborn son got sick with an ear infection, and he kept on waking up out of his bassinet crying. And we woke up, and I tried to comfort him, and he just kept screaming and screaming. So eventually, I think my children's uncle, who was also living there, woke up and said, we were both trying to comfort the baby, and my ex-husband did not want to wake up. He was tired after working his shift, and we were trying to explain to him that the child was sick and we needed to go to the ER. So eventually I got frustrated and upset, and I said, listen, this is your son. He keeps crying, he keeps screaming. We need to take him to the hospital. So then he gets up, my ex-husband gets into my face and is like, who the hell are you talking to? Don't disrespect me. And he's right here. Okay, I remember. You know how a person can be standing some feet away from you? Well, he was right here, and I backed up into a wall, and he was like, who are you talking to? I will slap you. And he got in my face. And eventually we ended up taking the child to the hospital, and he was sick. He had an ear infection. That's why he was screaming all night. And while we were in the hospital, we happened to be walking into the waiting room, and my husband was still angry and upset. Ex-husband, sorry, was angry and upset that I had woken him and that we had had words. And he took a swing at me. Yeah, he took a swing at me. He went like this, and I was able to dodge it. And there happened to be a security guard that was over in that area. And I told him, I said, if you touch me, I'm going to report you to the security guard. So then eventually he walked some feet away from me. So that was the first attempt for him to hit me, but it didn't go through. I was able to dodge it. And long story short, we ended up going back home. And, I later spoke to somebody about what happened. And at that time, I started reaching out to a DV counselor. And there's something called the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So I spoke to someone from there, and they referred me for counseling. So I started going to counseling unbeknownst to my ex-husband. And long story short, eventually there were more incidents where he would curse me out, call me out of my name, call me a bitch, blame me for all the problems that we were facing in the marriage. It was always my fault. He should have never married me. He can't provide for me. And meanwhile, I'm raising our son, I eventually ended up having to get a job, and that was helpful because I was able to get out of the house and not be around him too much. At that time, we didn't have a place of our own, so we were staying with his folks, and sometimes he would come over. I was going in between houses because of how volatile our relationship was. We would have a lot of arguments, we would have a lot of disagreements, and they would get heated. And eventually, once I started getting counseling, I started resisting. I started fighting back because I knew that the names he was calling me and the things he was saying about me, that it wasn't true. Something deep within myself knew that even if we got married, and we got married at a time where we maybe shouldn't have, that it wasn't all my fault. I didn't put a gun to his head and force him to marry me. Okay, this was a choice that we both went and we both eloped, and we both had a child now. So I was trying to step up to the plate. I was trying to be responsible. He would go through his stuff. I would try to be a supportive wife. I would be praying for him. I would be encouraging him, but it was falling on deaf ears. And, he was just didn't want to, I was just the blame for everything. So eventually he cheated. He started cheating. I ended up having to be tested for STDs a couple of times because of his cheating. So eventually, after all of those things, I filed for divorce. When you leave an abuser or an abusive person is one of the most dangerous times, because the abuser is losing control now. And so if he threatened you before, then he may start to stalk you. If he was violent before, that violence may even turn up a notch. And I began to be threatened. He's threatening my life, calling me out my name, showing up to my mother's house unannounced, banging on the doors, trying to accuse me of being with other men. And at the time, I really wasn't. I went through a lot in that relationship. Those are just some of the things. I can't talk about it all, but you get the picture. The relationship was toxic. The relationship, was abusive. But thank goodness I was getting counseling and I was learning how to resist. I was learning how to fight back. And eventually I came to the consensus that it was not going to work, that when you have a relationship and two people are not putting their all in trying to make it work, you can go into a boxing ring and you can fight a boxing match, but you can't fight alone. And that's what I was doing. Going to counseling, he wouldn't show up. I was fighting alone. He didn't want to do the things that the counselor was requesting. So I knew that things were not going to change. He eventually ended up hitting me physically, and I ended up leaving him. And I ended up getting separated. I don't know, it wasn't a legal separation, but I just stayed away from him and wasn't going to his parents' house anymore for a while. And yeah, that's how it ended up being. I had to leave. And once I left, he started showing up, banging on the door and threatening me and sending me text messages, accusing me of being with other men. And yeah, it was deep, but those are just some of the things that an abused spouse will go through. And like I said, people don't understand that. Why don't you just leave him? It's not so simple, especially if you have children. Because remember, you have a child, and when the abuser cannot hurt you, who do you think he's going to hurt? If he's angry and he's bitter, he's going to turn that anger and vitriol towards those children. So that was part 2, and I will be sharing part 3 shortly. This is Selah the Poet, signing out. Peace.